Hi, everyone. Welcome to another amazing topic of conversation. First of all, before we dive into, I really want to thank my sponsors, the Health Channel. Please subscribe to the Health Channel newsletter. And also for the Chef in You, we want to thank Finkelman's, all the tools that you need. From the power of the heels, we're back to our monthly networking. Please register. We're going live so we can be re energized, refocused, and reimagined. The next one every month, next one November 10th. So, welcome, Elle. Thank
Thank you.
you so much for joining us. I really wanted to talk to you to get a little bit of insight on a lot of things, especially since we thought the war in Ukraine was going to last, what? Everybody thought 15 days, and now we're going into the eighth month. And your story came about as a very interesting story because you are born in the United States, you're an entrepreneur, and you chose to enlist in the Israeli Defense Forces. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
What made you change? What happened? What made you make the transition from being an entrepreneur, having your own business, and leaving everything and going to Israel, not for a tourist visa, to literally fight?
So I had my own business at the time, like you mentioned, and that was a really rough period in my life where I was still trying to find myself. And a friend had called me and said, "Do you want to do birthright with me?" And at the time, I had no interest in traveling, let alone traveling to Israel when there was a war going on. This was back in 2014. There was Operation Protective Edge going on at that time. And it turned out that Birthright had given us, the participants, an option to cancel the trip because this war had just broken out.
But
And then,
wait, before you continue with that, for many that do not know what birthright is, it's an organization that takes, I think it's under 25, right?
I believe they increased the age, but it is young teenagers and young adolescents.
That
Yes.
have a Jewish connection,
Mm-hmm.
that have never been to Israel. So this trip is paid completely by Birthright.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe it's a privately owned donor that
Yes.
sponsors the entire 10-day trip. Um, it was incredible, nothing short of incredible. And on my specific trip, given the very fragile time period that was going on and what was going on in Israel at the time, they actually gave us the option to cancel and withdraw, without any penalty. And instead of being 60 participants on my trip, it was 30. And one thing I noticed is that because it was half the size, it was also a lot more intimate. And on each birthright trip, you have about 4 to 5 Israeli soldiers that join you on your trip, primarily for protection, secondarily to give these Israeli soldiers a little taste of American tourism and what life is like, living alongside these Americans. So I got very, very close to all the soldiers that were on my trip. And after the trip was over, I decided to extend for 3 more weeks. And it was during these 3 weeks that were really, really transformative for me, both on a personal level and on an emotional level. And what I found was there was an energy in Israel at the time, even with the war, that there was just all of this camaraderie, and this entire nation just came together and really felt like one. And everybody became like a single person, and everybody looked out for each other. And tensions were high, but you didn't feel it because all you felt was the love that you were surrounded by. And that's when I knew. I told myself, I said, there's an opportunity for me here to fight for something bigger than myself, to leave my family behind, my friends behind, my car, my bed, everything I had ever known and was privileged to have growing up, to leave that all behind and say, I'm going to give up all of that, sacrifice essentially my life, right? And go fight with the IDF. And I decided to do that because I thought, if not now, then when? And the answer was, if not now, it would never happen. So ultimately, that the decision was my own. And after speaking to many, many people, I said, I'm going to do it. And then I never looked back.
Your parents?
So the reaction was very, very mixed. In the house, I come from a very big family, very opinionated family. So everyone had their fair share of opinions. My parents and none of my siblings have ever served in the Israeli army. So it was something that was very, very foreign to them. Even though both parents were born in Israel, it was still a very foreign concept to go serve in the IDF, especially when it was voluntarily and not an obligation, right? Because when you're born in Israel, you do have an obligation that when you graduate high school, male or female, you do have to enlist in the army. In addition to that, anybody that chooses to move to Israel before a certain age also needs to serve. So,
and they
given
serve
my
3 years.
yeah,
It's not
so
like
women, I believe,
here.
have to serve for 2 years, and men have to serve for 3.
It's not like here
And
that you graduate and you start college. They graduate from high school and you start the army and then you go to college.
exactly. So it's a very different pace of life and a little bit of a different timeline there. And I think, reason being is that submerging yourself into something like an army really helps you find yourself and helps you figure out what it is that you want to do. So the interesting part is many people go on birthright at 18, 19, 20, during college. I decided to go on birthright at 24. So I had known at the time that if I want to do the army, it probably won't be until I'm turning 25. So everyone, when I would tell them this, they would laugh at me and they would say, there's no way the army wants, a 25-year-old that already graduated college in America, that already has their own business. Like, what in the world would you have any business coming here? Like, there is zero interest or reason for you to ever want to do this. And they have rules in place. And one of those rules is you don't need to, nor can you serve in the army past a certain age. And I was past that certain age. Now, being the driven person that I am, I wasn't going to be willing to take no for an answer. So my journey
was the cutoff age?
The cutoff age, this has been years ago, but I want to say the cutoff age is 22 or 23.
Okay.
And my first battle actually started before I even enlisted. And that was the battle of, fighting my way into the army to even be able to enlist. And that was a very long, tedious process. And that started with a lot of phone calls to a lot of different organizations, some of which include FIDF, another organization called Nefesh B'Nefesh, which helps, lone soldiers. And I'll touch on that in a second. Lone soldiers enlist in the army. So the term lone soldier comes obviously from the word lone, lonely. And basically what that means is anytime that somebody is going to volunteer in the army without any family in Israel, they're what's called a lone soldier. Another person that fits that criteria is an orphan that is born and or raised in Israel. So lone soldiers get a few extra benefits. Some of the things that come to mind are what's known in English as a day to run errands. So it's an errand day. So we would get one of those every month. Traditional soldiers don't get that because they're going home. They have family. They have that support system. Lone soldiers lack that support system.
You
So
lone soldier, right?
I was considered a lone soldier. Yes.
Because your
Yes.
family was here?
Yep. I didn't have any family in Israel, aside from a few distant cousins. and then American friends that I knew. But I was, yes, most definitely considered what's called a lone soldier. And they do a few extra, activities for Shabbat, things like that. And it's really just to bring you together with the other soldiers and really help you feel loved and supported during your service. So going back to me trying to even fight to get into the army, a lot of it started with phone calls, like I mentioned, and a lot of rejection. And that rejection turned into me appealing those decisions and writing letters and essays on reasons why I believe that I am of value to the Israeli society and to the Israeli army, and why they should essentially accept my desire and application to want to join the army. And after a few weeks, they said, look, if you're really serious about this, make aliyah to Israel. So aliyah is a term that we use to describe anybody that wants to essentially migrate to Israel and become a citizen of Israel. And they said, you'll have to become a citizen of Israel and move here to prove to us that you're really serious about this. And I said, well, what happens if I don't get into the army? And they said, well, that's on you. You decided to move here, and that was the sacrifice that you needed to sign up for. And that's what I did. I moved
So
to
it was
Israel.
the other way around.
What's that?
It was the other way around. Like you were moving to Israel to get into the army, not getting to.
Exactly. Exactly. So there were a lot of unknowns, right? There were a lot of, and the unknown is a scary place. A lot of people fear the unknown, especially me with a little support from my family, because what you see on the news at the time was very, tense and problematic. And my parents, siblings, they didn't want me to throw myself into a situation like that. So I decided to pack. Sorry.
What happened to your business? You decided
So
to move to Israel.
so I decided to move to Israel. And before I decided to move to Israel, I had to decide if I was going to be giving up my business, right? Because the business was new and it wasn't in a position to be left in anybody else's hands but my own, because I didn't feel that anyone would care for the business like I would myself. And I had to make a decision. And I was at a really tough crossroad. And it was either go to the army and fulfill this very short term dream that I had just dreamt of 6 months prior, or to continue my business, which I had a dream for many, many years, to have my own clothing store. And it turns out that I chose to go to the army and move to Israel because I thought I can always start a business. I could start a business at 80 years old if I wanted to. But if I'm going to get to the army, now's my chance to do it. This is the only possible time that the odds are somewhat in my favor, even though they were very much not in my favor. So I decided to up and move to Israel. And I moved there in December of 2015. And for 6 months, I had to fight and fight and fight. And that's where I was writing these letters. I had to get letters of recommendation. I had to get character references from friends and family. It was almost like fighting to go
To
to.
fight, to go and fight.
Yes, exactly. And it was very ironic, right? Because everyone looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. They said, you're fighting to leave Miami, to leave this glamorous city. You come from an amazing house. You had your own business. You have your own car. You have your own dream, your life, your comfortable bed, and you want to give that all up to come sleep on a cot in the middle of the desert. Like something's not making sense. And I think that it's something that's been very hard for me to put into words, but it was a feeling that I felt on that trip.
Like a calling, like what they call literally a calling.
Yes, exactly. And it was literally that, right? It was literally like, this is my opportunity in my life to fight for something bigger than myself, bigger than anything I can even grasp, and to do something for the greater good. And it became sort of like this bucket list item that was never on my bucket list to begin with.
Even
But
if your life was in danger, like that part where
I
you
was
were scared.
ready. I was ready to give everything up. Yes. Yes. There was fear. Of course I was scared. Um, there were so many unknowns. I didn't know what kind of situation I was going to be faced with. I didn't know what base I would end up on. I didn't know what job I would end up being given. The only thing I knew was this is what I want to do. And the first step, if I get in, is basic training. And that, and ultimately I got in. I got a call one day from, the head of one of these the IDF offices. And they said, we took a look at your essays and your reference letters and things like that. And we will give you the opportunity to volunteer for a year. And, when can you come in to take your physical exam? There's a few exams that are required of you. Hebrew level exam, eye exam, ear exam, like all types of medical exams. But in addition to the medical side, there's also an emotional and psychological exam. And then there is, of course, the Hebrew language exam, since they do speak Hebrew in the IDF.
That's persistence and passion.
Yes, to say the least. So they, as the saying goes, persistence beats resistance, and I did come out victorious in that first fight that I was really fighting to get into the IDF.
So now you're finally into the IDF.
So I finally get into the IDF. All of the exams are great. My Hebrew, not so great. So they send me to a base where they send a lot of American, French, South African, Canadian citizens to a base called the Mikve Alon. And they specialize in basic training, but simultaneously you're also taking Hebrew courses. And it's just a way to kind of expedite the process and teach you Hebrew, especially these military terms, on a quicker, just a little bit quicker and advanced. And then at the same time, you're also completing basic training. And while you're in basic training, you have your commanders evaluating you to see where you're best fit, and what skill sets you have and where you really can add value. Basic training is about 7 weeks. And after 4 weeks, I got called into my commander's office, and they said, hey, you got to pack your bags. You're leaving to a new base tomorrow. And that caught me by surprise, because I had just gotten comfortable. I just finished crying day in and day out, how I don't know if I made the right decision. I just became close with all these, other American girls and English speaking, girls and guys. And I just finally felt like we were a unit. And I said, well, when am I leaving? And they said, you're leaving tomorrow morning. And I said, well, where am I going? And they said, we assigned you a job. You should take this as a compliment. This is a very big honor that you're going to be actually getting assigned a job earlier on. We noticed that your leadership skills are very high. Your maturity level is through the roof. And at the time, they didn't even realize how old I was, right? They thought I was like a 19-year-old, just like everyone else. And when I had told them my age, they were just in shock. And I think that obviously, given the fact that I've been through college, I've been through some life experience a little bit more than these 18 and 19-year-olds, I think they saw that in me. And that's why they ultimately chose to assign me a job, which was a shooting instructor. And reason being, they gave me a very instructional role, because to be an instructor, you need to just have a little bit more patience and be able to guide a large group of soldiers on any given task. And in my case, it was how to shoot a gun.
But have you ever had experience with shooting guns? Were you ever exposed?
So, coming from Florida, it's very easy to just go to a shooting range and shoot for fun, whether it's for educational purposes or safety purposes. So I've taken a safety class, but that was with a very different I shot a handgun in the past, but I've never had experience shooting an M16, which is semi-automatic rifle, military grade. So that was very, very foreign to me. And you get exposed to it in basic training. Not to mention, if you are given this role as a shooting instructor, you are then sent to advanced training. And that's really where you take a deep dive into how the gun works and how it operates and how to put it together and take it apart and use it properly, and all types of etiquette and rules surrounding this gun. And then you have to take everything that you learned and then teach it in a digestible way to a group of 600 soldiers every 4 months. Every 4 months there was a new cohort of soldiers coming in, and essentially that was my job, is that every time there was a new cohort, I would then teach them how to use their gun. We would do different drills, daytime drills, nighttime drills, all types of drills. And that was my experience as a shooting instructor in the IDF.
Did you ever go to the front, or were you ever involved in like real fighting?
So no, my job was considered combat support. So there's 3 different levels. So there's combat, and those are the soldiers that I'm teaching, right? Then there's combat support, which is my position, which are supporting the combat soldiers. And then the third one being more administrative, and office and intelligence and those types of roles. So there actually were times, because tensions were still high, given that Operation Protective Edge had just ended. There were many situations where I was very close to acts of terrorism firsthand. And by a stroke of luck, I was safe and out of harm's way. But there were many moments where I did feel the tension and did feel it was very dark at times, right? Because you're in train stations and bus stations, and you're in uniform, and then you're speaking English. And if you find yourself at the wrong place at the wrong time, you have a very big target on your back. So there were times where I have felt unsafe, but overall, I knew that I was in the safest place in the world. So ultimately, my safety came first, and I was able to be fine.
But one thing is to feel safe, and the other thing is to feel scared. Were you ever scared?
Yes. Yes. The short answer is yes. I was scared on several occasions. I was scared on a personal level where I didn't have my family around, and that felt lonely at times. And then I was scared when bouts of terrorism were going on, and I felt so close to it. There were times where my base was on lockdown, or the train station I was in became on lockdown, and all these things. And it was moments like that. But it's interesting, because the moments that I felt the most scared, I also felt the most brave and like ready to fight, even though I knew I wasn't going to be going into the front like lines, or any enemy territory. I still felt the most safe.
Was it everything that you envisioned?
In full transparency, I didn't envision much, because I didn't have expectations. It was never a lifelong dream for me. For some, it was a lifelong dream to go serve in the IDF, and they turn 18 and they do it. For me, it was very different. It was very much like I saw firsthand what a war zone looks like, and I want to help and I want to contribute, and I'm going to do it whether the conditions are in my favor or not. And if anything, the conditions were worse than I expected, right? Because I think I came from a little bit of this like fairy tale, like, oh, I'm gonna do it. And then I got there and I was like, wow, they weren't kidding. Like,
what did I get myself into?
Exactly. I was packing my blow dryer.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
I got to base, and they were like, we don't even have outlets. Like, you better keep that thing at home, because that's not going to have any use. Yeah. I didn't like to go to bed with wet hair. I thought I need to bring my blow dryer. But then I realized there's no AC, so it's probably not going to be very cold either.
That's how disconnected you totally were.
Exactly.
So why didn't you stay? You decided to come back to the States.
So at the end of the day, I knew that my goal, I was on a mission, right? And I felt that I accomplished that goal in that mission. And after serving in the Army for 14 months, I knew that ultimately my head, my heart was there, but my head was here. And my business that I then got rid of, I wanted to come back and start a new business, because I'm very entrepreneurial by spirit. And I wanted to come back and be close to family again. And I felt like my job there was not over, because it's never over. As a Jewish person, I think that we all have a duty to stay and keep Israel like near and dear to us. But I felt that my time in the army was over. And aside from the army, I wasn't sure that society in Israel needed me. I felt that I needed to be back home near my family and start something of my own.
Did it change a lot the experience in the way you do things now?
It did, for better or worse. My time in the army definitely made me more punctual and on time. Um, I was always a little bit, type A, but this kind of enhanced that. And from a business perspective, it made me always want to run a very tight ship, from a business strategy. But I think that being in the army, it made me open my eyes, especially being around kids that were younger than they were literally just children that had just graduated high school. And it made me realize it doesn't matter how old or young you are. It matters what you can give. And one thing that always sticks out to me is that I like to remind myself of is always, you know, take what you need, but give what you can. And it's always, and that mentality has always stuck with me, even in business. Like, there's never any reason to be greedy in business. It's just take what you absolutely need and then give everything that you can.
Got it. So now, what business did you open?
So I came back and I did not open a clothing business. I opened a food and beverage business called Beauty and the Board. And it's a luxury cheese and charcuterie business where we ship cheese and charcuterie boards to your door. We ship nationwide. We also deliver locally in South Florida. The website is beautyandtheboard.com. It's been going almost on 4 years now. So it's been quite some time. I've grown the business with the help of, obviously family and a support system. And I love what I do. And I think that a lot of the things that I picked up on in the army have those skill sets have transferred over to my business today. And I'm forever grateful for that.
I think that was an amazing experience because a lot of people take like a term abroad or they go for the summer. So you actually went into the
Yeah, studying abroad is something that I've never done, but I always joke with my friends and I say, instead of partying abroad, I went and I shot guns abroad. So it's funny, but yeah, I mean, it's I would say it's the chapter in my, life story that I'm writing. Not literally, but just figuratively, that I'm probably the most proud of, because sometimes the hardest things are the most worth it in the end. And that was single-handedly the toughest experience that I've ever had to go through, especially
especially
volunteer.
leaving your blow dryer.
Oh yeah.
I think that must have been the ultimate wake up call. Like,
Oh
really,
yes,
what am I doing?
to say the least. Absolutely.
Elle, thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
have been an inspiration of resilience, passion, persistence, and you didn't give up.
I wasn't going to let myself give up.
So
I had a
hopefully,
target and I shot the bullseye.
so hopefully you can inspire a lot of, especially women out there that, like you said, the unknown.
Absolutely. And a lot of times there's a stigma around, doing specific things at a specific age. And there's a lot of societal pressure around those things. And I think sometimes you just have to kind of block those thoughts out, focus on what it is that you want to accomplish as an individual. And especially for young women, like, don't let anybody tell you you can't do this or you can't do that. I think that if you stay focused on your goal, you'll reach it. Whether it's, a few days, a few weeks, or a few months, you'll end up getting to where you want to get to.
And with that, I really, really thank you. To everyone, please stay safe above all, and I'll see you next week. Have a great day.
Thank you.